Let's just open up. Hello and welcome. So as it says on my name tag, I'm Lindsay Alton-Bogard, and I'm hosting this interactive webinar on behalf of Mirror Mirror. So we are joined by a panel of experts. One thing they have in common is their interest in practical ways to support our organisations, and they're all members of our Mirror Mirror Expert Facilitator Network. So we have Jackie Lehman-Gray, who was previously the Managing Director EMEA for the Neuro Leadership Institute. So her career spans law, HR, D&I, leadership and change consultancy and global sales. She's known for her work on innovative leadership programs and board-level executive mentoring for FTSE 100 companies. And the reason why she's particularly interesting to hear today is because she's got a doctorate in anxiety, which must have been an anxious experience in itself, and a master's in top team development, and has been a guest lecturer at Cranfield IE Business School and LBS. Nikki Hinksman has spent 20 years helping people be at their best. As a partner of Think Love Education, she coaches and facilitates individuals and teams, addressing core issues that get in the way of them being their most authentic, sustainable and productive selves. And last but not least, we have Susie Giles, Managing Director of Giles Global Communications Consultancy, working with organisations with a global footprint, supporting them with communication strategy, branding, internal comms and change management, originally from the UK but lives and works in The Hague. So the format for this call that we have here today is where we have 5 or 10 minutes of presentation from each speaker, and then a Q&A after each one. So what I want you to do, probably for this, we're using this call kind of setup here instead of a webinar, so that when you want to ask questions, you can either put them in the chat, or you can just put your video on and raise your hand. So we do want this to be as interactive as possible. And this way, we may have time for a bit of questions at the end as well, but we want to do presentation, some questions, and just make it a bit more of a discussion than your average webinar. So please do use the opportunity to talk to these experienced panelists here. But before we do that, let me just take a minute just to explain what connects everybody and what Mirror Mirror is. I'll share my screen and go to the slides. Okay. So I've got some research here that I thought was particularly interesting to bring along today, because it's relevant to today's sort of situation that we're all in. Virtual teammates are 2.5 times more likely to perceive mistrust, incompetence, broken commitments, and bad decision-making with distant colleagues than those who are located, and they report taking 5 to 10 times longer to address their concerns. Now, in the language that we speak here at Mirror Mirror, that would be called misalignment. And it's where people are making assumptions, people are having their biases, they're picking up things, they're unable to check them out. And because of, it's precisely because of situations like that that Mirror Mirror exists. For those of you who don't know about it, very briefly, what we do is we identify and measure alignment gaps in teams. And that's to the strategy in between people, and it's cognitive and behavioral. And so previously or traditionally, alignment is thought of as being when the individual goals match up to the team goals and the organization goals. And if you write that down, everybody's aligned. But we now know that because of diversity and because of these misassumptions and because of the ways that people don't think in the same ways, that's an advantage as well as a disadvantage, and it can easily lead to this misalignment, which can cause a lot of problems in organizations. So what we do is we quantify them by breaking down things like psychological safety into different parts. For example, freedom to raise issues and questions, asking people whether they feel that there is positive and equal treatment in the team, etc. And by asking people about the space between them at a behavioral and a cognitive level, we can pull forward and identify what needs to be discussed and what needs to be put on the table. And so it's all about building shared mental models, and it's very common. I mean, this research is from 2017, but there's stuff going back about shared mental models to the 60s, actually. But it's very much common sense. I mean, the quote here says, you know, when people reciprocally exchange information about each other's thinking and the meanings they are ascribing to things, processes of alignment unfold over time, creating a social interaction and shared understandings, which is the cognitive and behavioral alignment that we're talking about. So I think this all relates quite a lot to the content that's going to be discussed. It's all about the right conversation. It's all about how people work fundamentally. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Jackie, who will take us through more about the neuroscience of managing fear.
Thank you. So if we could move on to the first slide, I think. Thanks. I've been studying anxiety in senior leaders for decades, far too long, really. And my practical experience was kind of underpinned when I started learning about neuroscience. And that was about 12 years ago when I started working more closely with David Rock, who some of you might have heard from. And what I'm going to talk about today very quickly is how that does impact leaders in organizations. And this sort of rather glib slide actually is some of the mad thoughts that we're all having through this coronavirus. And I know that I have some of them. And the reason that we're all stressed out, even if we're sort of okay, is that the brain just makes stuff up, basically. If there's a vacuum, we make it up. So the overarching principle of social neuroscience and how we react to anxiety is that of threat and reward. So we run away from saber-toothed tigers and we come towards excitement and nice things like chocolate. When we perceive change as a threat, we experience all sorts of horrible things. We release chemicals, things like cortisol, which is known as the stress hormone. And we actually, over time, cortisol can be really dangerous to the body. It's particularly for women, actually, some research that we did. But I won't go into that a lot because I know Nikki's going to touch on that in a bit. We also release adrenaline, which is, it's great for excitement if you're about to run a race, if you're about to go on stage, but it's not so great if you're you know, trying to manage your life, homeschool your kids and worry about whether you'll have a job in 3 months' time. So generally, you do not want to perceive change or something new like a pandemic as a threat. The skill is to actually try and perceive change as a challenge. Because when we experience change as a challenge, we actually experience something called eustress. And eustress is where we'll release happy hormones, things like dopamine, which is when we release dopamine when we want to eat chocolate, or in my case, drink a glass of wine or have sex. They're all the sort of things that we know release dopamine. And serotonin, there's all sorts of chemicals that happen, but basically the core concept is you want to be looking at this as something that you can learn from, an experience where you can grow. And if you can get your mindset into the right mindset, you will manage the process much better. So we want some stress in our lives in order to get out of bed in the morning, but not too much, because when we have too much stress, it affects performance negatively. And the brain doesn't know the difference between social pain and physical pain. So at the moment, a lot of people's brains are in pain. There's a little bit above your right ear called the anterior cingulate cortex. And when we're in emotional pain, it will highlight in the same way that it highlights when we break our legs, that sort of thing. So this is real pain that people are experiencing. And so we need real habits and strategies to get us through. We could move on. So this is a slide that I use normally when we're not in lockdown, but it's even more important now. These are all the things that HR type people, I used to be an HRD, and these are all the things that I'd say to leaders, you need to be doing on top of your day job. And some of it's quite hard work. But right now we need to turn the volume up. We need to get more authentic. We need to show more of ourselves. We need to learn to be more resilient, which is easier said than done. And we need to lead change and manage complexity. All of these things are absolutely vital right now. So I've come up with 3 habits that I think will help leaders through the change. And they are based on the research of a number of different neuroscientists, but also my research into authenticity from all my case study work in organizations. So if we could move on to the habits. So the 3 things that I came up with is stay positive and learn. That is really about adopting a growth mindset. And I expect most of you by now have heard of growth mindset, but it's basically the idea that you are open to learning, you're open to stretching, you're open to finding new ways to do things, valuing progress over time, rather than being fixed. Our fear mind is going, I can't do this, nothing will ever be the same again, I'm going to lose my house, whatever your fears are. We're very fixed and it makes us close down. With a growth mindset where I don't know how to do this yet. So for some people who weren't used to working virtually, it was a huge shift to learn to use Zoom and things like that. Not just the technology, but the actual ability to communicate through a screen. It was quite hard for a lot of people. Now everyone's doing it. Creating certainty when there is none is like standing in the face of adversity for your people. And I remember a program director at BT, it was, I think, many, many years ago. And I called him Hurricane Man because he was there. He was a big guy and he would be there. And it was like, you come through me, not my people. And he was that, I give them certainty that everything is okay, no matter what chaos is going on in this project. And we know from neuroscience, that certainty is a huge driver for a lot of people anyway. When you put them into a change or a scary place like a pandemic, the need for certainty will go up for everybody. And the third area is give people choices, even where they feel they don't have some. If you can give them some control over when they work, where they work, how they achieve their goals, that will calm the limbic system down. We have this little processor at the front of our brains called the prefrontal cortex, or the PFC. And that shuts down under extreme cognitive overload or stress. It gets hijacked by a little thing called the amygdala. And when our limbic system, our emotional brain, is in charge, we know that lights are on but no one's home. We can't think, we can't make decisions, we can't remember anything. So I'm conscious of time, I better move on. Include everyone. When we feel excluded, we get brain fog, we get lonely, we self-sabotage by eating burgers or baking. Everyone seems to be baking right now in the virus. We have all sorts of social habits. We give less to charities than normal because we feel isolated and excluded. And we know that when people feel included, the opposite is true. So please, anyone who gives to charities normally, especially little ones, don't stop. It's not just about giving to the front line. It's also charities going under because they're not getting the normal donations. Focus on cognitive collaboration, that's and technology. Actually use documents on Google Docs, work on them together, start creating work together really builds inclusion. We know where people have common goals that all differences go away. So that example Lindsay gave was really an example of distance bias, where we're apart. We don't see people the same. We tend to promote people we work with day to day, that sort of thing. So find ways to cognitively collaborate, to work together on things virtually. Build trust and relatedness in your team. That's about showing warmth as well as competence. A lot of us are very task orientated. We're very good at showing that we can do the job. But in these situations where we're all separate but working through screens, we need to work harder on the empathy stuff, work harder on acknowledgement and recognizing and connecting people. And the Hangouts are great for that as well, the relatedness stuff. Finally, how am I doing? I'm worrying about time here. Prioritizing what matters. First off, prioritize yourself. You have to be healthy. You have to exercise. We're all getting out more, but it's more difficult now it's raining. You know, I walk my dogs every day and I try to do a bit of exercise as well, but eat relatively well. Some of us are eating too much and drinking too much, but keep yourself healthy, focused, top form. Focus on essentials. A lot of people are still trying to do everything they used to do. It's not required right now. What are the really key things? And focus on that and do that. And finally, be a role model. If you start demonstrating these three things, people will start to feel psychological safety. And if anyone wants to read more, I would look up the work of Matt Lieberman, who is very big in social neuroscience and did a lot of great research. He's written a book called Social, and his wife Naomi Eisenberger, obviously the SCARF model with David Rock. Carol Dweck is the doyen of growth mindset. So I will stop talking now because I was told to stick to a short period of time so we can be interactive. What questions do we have?
Yeah, no, you've done pretty well. We're good on time. I just want to kind of apologise to the people who only just managed to get into the call, because we've got more people who've joined us now. I'm sorry that you missed the first part. We had to change the link last night. Partly my fault. My webinar account it expired, and I didn't know that everything would be just deleted without notice. So apologies for that.
We've got a recording though, haven't we?
Yeah,
so people want
got a recording. But if you missed the first part of that, the format here is that we're going to do a few minutes, 5-7 minutes presentation on behalf of Jackie, who's just finished, and then Susie, Nikki, and then Susie, and have questions in between. And you can put your video on. It's going to be more interactive, or you can just put a question into the chat. And I just want to kick that off, Jackie, if I may, by saying that you mentioned inclusion habits. I wanted to hear a bit more about those. What are they?
Well, inclusion habits were some habits that we designed that seem to encompass the core elements of how to make people feel included. And the first one is finding common ground. It's actually having shared goals, what we used to call building rapport. I don't know, you know, at the beginning of training courses, we'd do stupid bingo things and, you know, where are we similar? It's the, you know, my children go to the same school as yours go to, and things that we have in common, either socially or at work, which they cause all sense of difference to go away. So from the point of view of bias, having a strong focus will pull it back together. The second area is to acknowledge and recognize people even more. I think having done the career I've done, I knew recognition and acknowledgement were important, of course, but I don't think I realized how important until I realized about this threat and reward thing, and how much you have to build up the reward to compensate for the brain's tendency to categorize everything as threat in order to protect itself. So the more, especially remotely, so if you're on meetings and you can sort of pull someone out who's done something well, mention it. It's really, really important to do that. And the third area is this creating clarity again. And it's links back to people's need for autonomy and control. So if you're clear in what you want from people and what the next steps are, and give them choice, they will feel included.
Do wave anyone if you've got a question. You can put your video on and wave if you have got a question. There is another one that's come in. You know, is it possible that somebody can just adopt a growth mindset? Are people not just born with the way that they're thinking in terms of fixed or growth? How does that work?
No, people, I would say, through personal experience, tend to be more one way than the other, but certainly none of us are entirely fixed or entirely growth. So basically, fixed mindset thinking is where people are very rigid. you know, they don't believe they can do anything. They don't like role models because they're threatening and might make them look stupid. It's about proving yourself. Growth mindset is really learning from others, being willing to share your mistakes actually is very powerful. We've done a lot of work. One company actually adopted mistake of the month. So it was like, share a mistake you made, but share what you learned from it, so that they're a learning organization. Allowing other people to stretch and take risks, experiment, and I guess rewarding progress over time. So if you're looking at someone's progress, instead of saying, "We're not very good at that, are you?" or "You need to brush up those skills," it would be better to say, "You've made great progress, but there's further to go." So it's looking at people over a longer period and seeing the journey, yourself and other people.
Okay, any other questions at the moment before we move across to Nikki, who's going to talk to us about Think Love? Okay, all right. Nikki, I'm going to share my screen so that you can get your slides up, and we can move over to your presentation. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. And actually, I'm going to build a bit on what Jackie's been talking about, particularly the stay positive and learn piece. So as I was thinking about speaking today, I was sort of casting my mind back to the beginning, really, of this particular crisis that we're in at the moment. And I was just reminding myself of how much time I spent watching the news, which actually I don't generally spend a huge amount of time watching the news, but certainly in the early days of the pandemic, I upped the amount of news that I was watching. Seeing the news from China and Italy and then other parts of Europe, and watching the responses and the decision making as the virus spread across the globe. And I was sort of reminding myself of how, with that move towards the UK where I'm based, I could feel the levels of fear rising in me. And I was noticing it in everybody else around me, you know, how much the language was shifting in the news reporting that I was watching. And then I started noticing that familiar pattern in myself, in everybody that I was in contact with, and broader than that as well. And what I was noticing was the 4 classic responses to fear, you know, what it does to us. The 4 Fs: fight, flight, freeze, and flock. You know, that desire to fight for some of us, when the pandemic was coming closer and closer to us, we started fighting. We weren't physically fighting with each other, but we were fighting to take control, to maintain that everything was going to be all right, that we were going to be able to carry on working, that we could keep in control of things. Actually, we did see some physical fighting as people were going to shops and making sure that they had all the food and groceries that they needed. Some of us were flying in the opposite direction, and what that manifested as was denial. Actually, I don't think this is a real thing. I'm not sure I believe this at all. I mean, it seems to be really far away at the moment. So complete denial and not really facing into it. The freeze was just that. Well, I mean, I kind of think that picture there sums it up, really, where it was that shutdown that Jackie talked about, just not knowing what to do, not knowing whether to go and get groceries or what conversations to have with people, just the brain slowly closing down. And then the flock, you know, the instinct to flock, to come together and to be having lots and lots of conversations with lots and lots of different people. How are you feeling about this? What do you think about it? Do you believe what the news is saying? So all coming together, and in noticing those patterns of the fear reaction, and actually I think we use lots and lots of different words for fear. Jackie used a number as she was talking. You know, sometimes we talk about it as stress, sometimes we talk about it as worry or anxiety or concern, but actually these are all variants of the same kind of reactions that are going on inside us. So, you know, I think whatever word we're using, it's useful to, and again, Jackie touched on this, to really look at what's going on inside our bodies. A few years back, I saw a brilliant TED talk called, and I love the title, The Magical Science of Storytelling. And it was by a communications expert called David J. Phillips. And he talked about how different ways of communicating with each other can create different reactions, actually different reactions at a biochemical level within our bodies. And he talks about these as the angels and the devil's cocktail. And when we have too high, I wonder if we can move on to the next slide, Lindsay. When we have too high a level of the devil's cocktail inside us, what happens to us is we become incredibly irritable, we become really uncreative, our memory becomes impaired, and we make really bad decisions. And that's exactly the kind of stuff we don't want when we're in the middle of a crisis, because we need to be able to make smarter decisions, more precise decisions. We need to be at our most creative in order to adapt to what's going on. But if we're at the mercy of fear and we've got a whole load of devil's cocktail rushing around inside our body, we're not going to have that. I saw this link on LinkedIn the other day, which for me summed up a huge amount of, I think, some of the impact. Lindsay, I wonder if we could move on to the next slide. And it was kind of looking, for me, it embraced a lot of the things that I was feeling, you know, those all over the place feelings you've been having, they're not symptoms of, they're symptoms of stress. They're not personal to you. You know, essentially what a lot of these messages talk about is how during a state of fear, when that devil's cocktail has got its hold on us, the functionality of the brain starts shutting down and our performance diminishes. And it's precisely a time when we need our performance to be at its best. So fortunately, there is an antidote to the devil's cocktail, and it's the angel's cocktail. And the angel's cocktail is composed of dopamine, oxytocin, and endorphins. Dopamine, Jackie already talked about. It's the hormone that we release into our systems when we're in anticipation of something. Oxytocin is released when we connect with people that we really care about. It's the love drug. And endorphins are the happy drug, the things that are stimulated by eating chocolate and exercise, which I would always recommend in equal doses. Watching a great comedy, you know, these are the things that will inspire the angel's cocktail within us. And what I love about this, that idea of the angel's cocktail or the devil's cocktail, is it gives us a really nice shorthand. Because when the angel's cocktail is coursing through our systems, what happens to us and the impact of it is that we are incredibly creative. We're very trusting and we bond with each other, and we're much more generous towards each other. We're really focused, but we're focused in a way that is in a relaxed state. And this is what we need. During a time of crisis, we need much more of that angel's cocktail. Now, as Jackie said, you know, we're kind of programmed to recognize and identify threats. We're constantly scanning the environment around us to see and watch out for threats and to respond to them. So what I'm talking about here is us raising our conscious awareness so that we can work with our biology rather than our biology just taking over and shoving loads of the devil's cocktail through our system. And I was reminded literally just before coming on this of this brilliant book. If you've not come across it, I would definitely recommend this as a read. Viktor Frankl and this book starts off based with his experiences during the prisoner of war camps in the Second World War. He was Jewish, so he spent most of the Second World War in lots of different concentration camps. He's also a psychologist and developed the theory of logotherapy, which is about having purposefulness. And I just wanted to, and I'm going to read this because I want to get the quote right. What he describes is between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is our opportunity to choose. And in that choice is our growth. So it's not that what's going on in the world around us is creating a huge amount of stimulus for us. And I think it's very easy for us to say, do you know what, biology says I'm going to respond to it from a fear place. But what Viktor Frankl's teaching us is actually that there's a space in between the stimulus and how I choose to respond to it. And that's the space that we've got to get into. So the way that it works is we witness something, we interpret it in our thinking, we then gather evidence to build a belief around that thought, and that makes us feel something. And it's those feelings that drive the way that we behave. Lindsay, I wonder if we could just pop on to the next slide. It's always good to have a bit of Buddha by your side, isn't it? The thought manifests itself as the word manifests itself as the deed develops into habit, and the habit hardens into character. We are all incredibly practiced in observing and feasting on fear and threats. So it's very easy for what hardens into character to be a very fear-based or fixed mindset. But actually what we need to do is we need to step in and take charge of that. So at Think Love, what we talk about is a difference between a limited thought, one that comes from a place of fear, and a limitless thought, excuse me, one that comes from a place of expansion and usefulness. So here, and I can give you an example of this, and I wonder, Lindsay, if you could build this as we're going. So I was working with a client recently, and she started off the coaching session in a very fixed place. And what she said to me was that she was not feeling good enough. Actually, Jackie, it was very much stimulated from that isolation piece. She wasn't having the same levels of communication with her boss as she normally has. And so that was leaving her at mercy of these kind of fearful thoughts. And she'd really spiraled into this, I'm not good enough. And then she started gathering evidence to build her belief around that, which is, well, my boss isn't picking up the phone to me. He's deputizing other people. And then I asked her, so how is that making you feel? And she said, well, you know, pretty worthless. Like, I don't really know what my purpose is. I don't know what my job is. And I said, okay, so how's that? What are you noticing about the way that you're behaving? And she said, well, do you know what? Actually, I'm just burying my head in the stuff that I know I can deliver. It's not at the top of my performance. It's not stretching me, but it's safe and I know I can do it. And actually, I've stopped communicating. I've stopped trying to bother my boss because he's not getting in touch with me. Maybe he's really busy, so I'm not going to get in touch with him. So what she was doing, in fact, was restricting and limiting her thinking, but also her entire experience. And so if we take that idea of stepping in between the stimulus and the response, the way that I work with people is to take charge of that initial thought, because a limitless thought creates a limitless reality. Could we flick on to the next slide, Lindsay? Actually, we can go on to the next one. I guess the point I wanted to make around the last one is, I've made it already, actually. We're very well programmed to think fear. So actually to think love, to think limitless takes more consciousness and more practice. In the coaching session that I had with my client, in working through that pattern of what might be a limitless thought she could work with, and what evidence does she have for that, and how does that make her feel, and how could that make her behave? Actually, she managed to flip what was going on for her, and she realized, you know what, actually my limitless thought is, I don't want to deputize for my boss. That's not what I'm here to do. He's got other people that can do some of that. I've got a whole new business idea. This is what opened up for her. So that Angel's Cocktail started coming into her system, and she started thinking from a much more creative place of, actually, there's a whole new business opportunity for us during this time of crisis. And I know I can lead on that. I know I've got the support in the business. So I started asking her about her network and who she had, and she was able to pull that all together. And this started creating feelings of motivation and focus. And what streamed from that very, very quickly was an entire plan. So it's all about, and if we could move on to the final slide, this actually was my 7-year-old son's choice, this picture. As I was looking for images about taking a step, it just makes me really laugh. He went, that one, put that one in. Because it's all about taking a step. You know, we only get good at what we practice. So we have to practice being conscious and choosing a limitless thought to create a limitless reality. So I'll leave it there for now.
Wow, thank you very much, Nikki. That was captivating. If I don't see any hands up, I've got a question myself. I'll just step in with this one then. You know, it's called Thinking Love, and that's the practice that you're talking about with stepping in here in that space. I mean, it sounds very soft and fluffy, doesn't it? I mean, is it fluffy? I mean, can you bring it towards a level that in the workplace executives can consider this, because it's so fundamentally important, the way that people control or look to manage the way that they act. How would you say, how would you respond to the fluffy statement?
Yeah, do you know what? I think it's really interesting, and it's taken me, I've been working with Think Love as a client and as a facilitator, kind of building over the last 8 years. And when I first started working with the organization, I had a massive reaction to the idea of Thinking Love. I was just like, can't go into organizations and talk about that.
Yeah.
I think actually it's probably a little bit more palatable now, and certainly something that I've noticed within this experience that we're having at the moment is I think people's hearts are breaking open, right? We spend so much time in ego, which is hugely, it's all about fear, right? It's the protectionisms that we put around ourselves that stop us from being who we authentically are, but put barriers between us as human beings. And for me, actually, Thinking Love has been one of the hardest practices that I've ever put into action. You know, it's taken massive discipline, because what I'm talking about is working against the biology of my evolutionary biology, which wants to put me in a state of fear a lot of the time, kind of have me on edge and ready, good to go, ready to fight. And what I'm talking about is relaxing away from that. And we've all had experiences that have created pain for us, and we don't want to be in pain, so we do everything that we can to avoid that. So we've all got really good at putting conditioned behaviors around us in order to keep us what we perceive to be safe. But I kind of think during pandemics, during these kind of shared experiences, it's a great opportunity for our hearts just to crack open and for us to see greater authenticity from each other. I mean, I've been seeing that in really practical ways, like seeing everybody without makeup on, with the mess that is our home lives. You know, I don't even know who it was, you probably saw, you know, some of my family members come in. I mean, that doesn't happen during my normal working life, that my kids kind of crash in and go, I don't know how to do this maths whilst I'm trying to host a meeting. But we're all experiencing all of this, and I think there's something healthy about it.
Well, that's a good point, that actually things are much more challenging these days, and our natural way forward is with fear, and it's about looking at that differently, maybe not moving away from it. Jackie, would you say it's not about moving away, it's about just reframing it, right?
Yeah, it's much easier to create new more healthy wiring. So, you know, loving is a very healthy thing to do, obviously. But the natural response is fear, false evidence appearing real, you know, and we run away from fear. The flight thing that Nikki was speaking about, it's the natural tendency, as she says, is to avoid or run away. And you have to come forward and take a risk to be vulnerable, take a risk to share your real stories and your mistakes. And I have a golden retriever puppy that pops up behind me every so often, and everyone goes, "Oh!"
Stops listening to you.
Yeah, it's like, I think, "Oh, are they admiring me?" No, it's my puppy.
No.
I think when I was last on a call with you, Nikki, your husband, it was before the call, your husband didn't know that we were on the line together, and the line was just open and your camera was on, and he just came in with the Hoover and started hoovering up. So
did he have clothes on?
Luckily he did, but I mean, I was
Good.
admiring the handy husband. Anyway, let's move on. In the interest of time, I'd really like to introduce you to Susie. Thank you, Nikki. Thank you so far, Jackie. I'm going to share the screen onto your single slide, Susie, because you've got something quite practical to share with us, haven't you?
Yes, I have. Thank you, Lindsay, and thank you, Nikki and Jackie. And I'm coming at this from the angle of the communications professional who works with leaders and managers, and just listening to what you were both saying makes you realise why it's a difficult position to be in if you're a leader of a team right now. And I think it's important to remember that while in a crisis situation, it's quite common for us to want to control a lot of decision making, to be involved in a lot of different conversations, you actually have to allow yourself time to lead, because leadership is what people need from you right now. And of course, everything that you've both said points to the real importance of communication. And now is the time where those people and those leaders who actually don't communicate as effectively are probably finding that, you know, it's quite tricky to keep teams on track. When I work with teams, in a change situation, there's a common approach which we use, which can be applied in any change situation. But of course, we're in a change situation at the moment, which has been imposed upon us. And so it makes it extra difficult. But there is a structured way that you can think about what are the important stages I need to go through to get people through this change. And what I'm finding at the moment is clients I have are not just trying to keep the day job going and actually manage to deliver the business as usual. They are really having to rethink, what is my business going to look like in 2, 3, 4 months? Some of these are education clients, and obviously the way we're delivering education at the moment has changed drastically for some. And we have to, without a lot of knowledge at the moment, we have to really think about how we're going to continue to deliver that. But if we move on to the model, Lindsay, that we use. So I use a recognized change management tool, which is very people focused, and it's called ADKAR. It's an acronym. And the first part of ADKAR is very much around raising awareness. Now, in a normal change situation, this is about managers and leaders being very clear about the why, the purpose for what they're doing. And at the moment, the why is incredibly important, because people are also saying, what's our plan? What's our plan in this situation? We know from what Jackie and Nikki have said that, you know, our brains react badly in a threat situation. So we have a tendency to panic, and it doesn't help our productivity, and it doesn't help us move forward. But as a team leader and as a manager, you have to keep your teams moving forward. You have to keep your productivity going. So it's really, really important that you're transparent, you communicate regularly. And even if you don't have all the answers, don't be afraid to actually say that. You have to give people the information that you have at your fingertips that they can work with. And one of the strategies for helping people cope in this initial phase is that people perform better in this situation when they have short-term goals, because thinking about the long-term goals is quite hard. So actually, if you give people short-term targets of chunks of work to be done, it helps to give people back that control, because we have very much lost that control over our lives at the moment, and in the workplace. So making sure people are aware of what is needed, what the plan is. If your strategy has had to change or will have to change, just be very clear. Now, the desire part of this model is always referred to as well, what's in it for me? As in, what does my job contribute to whatever the organisation is doing and the change that's coming? At the moment, the feeling here is very much, am I going to have a job in 3 months? what is the future for my team? What is the future for the organization? So again, it's a case of making sure you communicate clearly, increase those one-to-one meetings, increase that face-to-face where you can, and make sure that there are regular checks in on people so that they can be assured as far as you can as to what's happening with their role, but the importance of what they're contributing to the organization. And then knowledge is the next part. In any change situation, you're looking at what's the knowledge set we have in our teams, what's the knowledge set that we're going to need to get to where we need to go. Now, at the moment, there are people faced with the options of developing some new skills. In the education sector, we're looking at how we do move to delivering education online. That's a whole new skill set for some people, and not everyone is comfortable with it. And so there needs to be a communicated plan of guidance of what training will be made available for people, how you're going to support as you move through this situation. So from the knowledge stage, we then talk about what's our ability to actually make that change and to cope with what's coming. Change generally can't happen until you actually reach a level of ability where people can actually perform what they need. So it's always an important milestone in any change in an organization. So at the moment, people are, as you said, grappling with the ability to actually use Zoom. People are finding that, I'm finding that when I have some meetings, there are some people who can't access Zoom because their work laptop doesn't allow it. And then suddenly we've locked people out of meetings we need in meetings. So, you know, there are some very basic challenges that we're coming up against at the moment. And so really it's, do we have the right tools? Think about, as a leader, you know, what do you need to make sure is in place? What you need to make sure your teams have so that they can function and do the job. And then finally, the reinforcement phase, which for me is incredibly important at the moment with everything that's going on. Reinforcement is about a couple of things. It's about, do we still know what the plan is? Are we still communicating that? And are we checking in on each other and making sure that we're all on track, but we're expressing any concerns or worries? And that those milestones, if they're not being hit, why? And let's relax that a little bit if we can. But especially, how do we know if we're winning? How do we know that we've achieved some success? And recognizing people's efforts and recognizing success in people is really important. You don't need to be in the same room as someone to thank them. You can do it virtually in meetings, you can do it in group meetings, you can do it one-to-one, but I think it's really, really important, very much so at the moment, to recognize that people are all working in a way that they're not always comfortable with. They're facing a lot of challenges at home and in their work, and keeping that reinforcement going is really, really important. So I think it's a lot to take on for a lot of managers and teams, but this is actually a really useful, practical tool as a checklist for, am I doing all of these things to the best of my ability at the moment, at least?
Yeah, I really like that. I mean, it puts a kind of a structure around things that helps people make sense of the chaos, if you like, or the complexity. We're getting some positive comments in the chat there. One thing I just wanted to sort of jump in with is, you know, there's a lot of managers who don't get that treatment that you're advocating that managers provide for their teams, for themselves.
Yeah.
So if people aren't getting reassurance from their managers, you know, how do they cope? What's your advice to them?
Yeah, it's interesting, and Nikki's example was interesting, and it's tricky because it may be that the manager or the leader is struggling themselves and they are swamped, and it may be that you need to offer to take something off them or actually have that honest conversation. I think it depends on your relationship with that manager. Alternatively, is there someone else who you can talk to, who has the relationship with that manager, who you can confide in, and also say, is there something I can do to help? Just today, I actually offered to take something off one of my amazing clients because I could see that they were struggling. And it's something I can easily help them think through. And I think that will just give a little bit of a sigh of relief for a moment. But I think it is sometimes tricky. And then you have to think about who are the other people in my network who I can confide in. I have been working in communications for 20 years. I have a mentor who I go to still every now and then, just to check in that I'm happy with the way I'm working. So an external mentor is also a really good person to have.
We had a question, a hand went up from Henry, although I can't see Henry at the moment. Henry, if you're there, you can put your video on to ask your question. Or maybe we had to go. And also, we've just had a couple of people join the call. So in the last few minutes, there will be a recording in the slides. And we've had the question, if each presenter has got a little short list of go-to reading books or articles or TED Talks, maybe top 2, 3, 4, you can send them to me and I'll circulate them to everybody who registered along with the slides if you can, especially Nikki, you were reading out a book there. It'd be great to see what book that was.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah,
I love that book too. It's amazing. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, it's not the lightest of reads at the beginning.
No, it's been around a long time, but it still resonates. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So
I think it's I'm reading another book at the moment called The 5 Invitations, and it very much is about lessons that we learn from end of life. And I know it sounds incredibly morbid, especially during this times when that's a huge reality for a lot of people. But it's about how we can project forward and utilize our lives better. Jackie, one of the things that you talked about was not doing everything but focusing in on the essentials. And I think Susie, that's the ADKAR model helps us to do that, is to be really, really focused rather than just doing everything. And I think often that bigger perspective on what really matters to me helps us to frame in our focus. And then with less on our plates, actually we're creating less of that devil's cocktail inside us anyway.
Yeah.
I've got a comment here. It says, while the pandemic has forced change on us, I think it's been a great proof point for being able to build change capability, meaning many organizations have scrambled to work remotely and differently extremely quickly, when in the past this could have been a point of resistance.
Okay.
Susie, they'd be keen to hear what your thoughts are in this regard.
Definitely. I think it's really interesting, actually. For who was it who was saying to me that for weeks and weeks and weeks they had asked their IT department to set something up so they could allow a change to a CRM, and the answer was always it couldn't be done. They made this change in 24 hours because they just stopped going through all the protocols and they stopped worrying about all the decision making, because it was needed and it was needed now, and they suddenly realized this is doable and things don't fall over.
Conversely, we've got a point in a crisis situation such as the pandemic. How do you make time to address the long-term view, or the long-term strategy, or is there any point?
Oh, that's a good question. Good question, because in this situation, it's changing so much. You may come up with a strategy that you then have to change again. I think I read a great McKinsey article, which I can send the link to you to send around, which was about how you actually set up different teams to be able to deal with different elements of your crisis. And actually, it's a task force group, as they refer to it. And actually, you actually have groups that work through this whole idea of designing a new way forward, and then how you would go about developing that. And actually, you can't, at this precise moment, you can't wait till you have all of the information, and you can't wait till everything's perfect, because you may never even get to that stage in the next 12 months. So you do have to go with scenario testing for the future, and it may be that you develop a few scenarios and you whittle those down, but to ignore it is dangerous, I think, but to have an allocated number of people dealing with a particular area makes it more manageable.
Okay, we are actually out of time now. A couple of people have just joined, and I'm hoping that they're not joining from the UK, having read the time in Central European time because of the 1 hour time difference. But we've got a recording. We'll circulate the slides for this session and the recording, along with any book recommendations that the panelists might like to share.
Can I just say happy birthday to my friend Jackie, who's on the call from America?
Happy
Bye,
birthday, Jackie.
So I'll close the line now by saying happy birthday to Jackie, and thank you very much for making this happen, everybody, particularly to the panelists, Jackie, Susie and Nikki. And thank you everybody for joining with the interactivity. It was nice to have you on the session, and thank you very much. Stay well, everybody. That's the end of the webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care,
Thank you.
everyone.
Namaste.